I'm a professor at the University of Massachusetts in Boston, and I've been studying, but also working with community organizing, parent and youth organizing groups across the country for over 25 years now, who are fighting for racial equity and educational justice. And I had the opportunity to meet Zakiya originally through Dignity in Schools campaign, probably going back 5 or so years, and had the opportunity to come out to Dayton to meet her and some of the other parents who were involved in leading in the organization there. And it was a very important part, inspiring part, and learning a piece for me. And so when we put together this sort of companion book, the Lift Us Up, Don't Push Us Out, invited Zakiya to write the first story and essay that opens that book. And in the Willful Defiance book that we're going to talk about today, in fact, Zakiya's story also starts that book off too, because I think it's so important for readers and educators and activists who read this book to understand not just the impact that the school to prison pipeline has on children of color, Black and brown children, but also on their parents, and the role that parents and as well as students play, not really as simply victims of this system, but their journeys to become racial justice organizers and band together with others to make change. And so I saw that everywhere I traveled around the country, but certainly in Dayton, Ohio. And so I'm glad to be here with friends, Zakiya and Hashim, inviting me here and to talk a little bit about this book and engage with you all about it. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mark, for that introduction and help us get started. Zakiya, I introduced you from the back of the book, from Lift Us Up, Don't Push Us Out. And let's give a little space to you to give yourself an introduction to some of the things you might want to share as we get into this Dignity in Schools campaign Week of Action event hosted Professor Mark Warren from the University of Massachusetts at Boston. Zakiya, you have the floor.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here with my friend Mark. As you said, we've been joined at the hip now for several years. And I'd be remiss not to tell the story about how I even ended up in the book in the first place. Mark and I met through Dignity in Schools. At the time, I was a co-chair of the coordinating committee for Dignity in Schools and still working locally in Dayton, Ohio, transforming schools locally at the city level there with Dayton City Schools, and then eventually at the state level for the entire state of Ohio, and how school discipline was transformed through the work of poor and working class Black families in Dayton. As Hashim mentioned, we're now located here in Montgomery County, Maryland. We launched the DMV chapter of Racial Justice Now in January of 2019. Both of our children attend Montgomery County Public Schools here. And we quickly realized that although this is a much different community than Dayton, which is an old deindustrialized city with lots and lots of poverty all over the city, schools heavily underfunded, funded by property taxes there, and an economic base that has been shattered due to deindustrialization. Moving here was like night and day, and also pretty much a cultural experience for us, experiencing other Black people who are not descendants of enslaved Africans here was certainly new for me. I remember going to my children's elementary school, and another Black woman walked up to me and started speaking Amharic. And she was from Ethiopia. She just assumed by looking at me that I looked Ethiopian to her. That was a beautiful experience. But we also quickly realized that even though Montgomery County Public Schools is a decently funded, pretty well-funded school district, it's a large school district, it's a very diverse school district, we quickly found out that Black children still were even marginalized here through a couple of experiences that we had with our own children. It sparked me to kind of start looking into the data and start digging deeper and start asking questions of other families here. And I quickly realized that, you know, it really doesn't matter whether the community is in poverty or not. somehow systems figure out a way to make sure that Black children and Black families continue to be marginalized. And so when we started doing this work here, we started looking at the numbers of students who were actually being arrested. At the time, MCPS had SROs in schools. And even though there wasn't a huge amount of arrests, the arrests that actually did happen were disproportionately of Black students. So for us, and the type of mission that we have and the type of history that we have, we quickly realized that it was time to start to organize here around racial and educational equity issues for Black students. So that's a little bit about the history, a snapshot, and a little about what we're doing now and where we're going. So thank you, Hashem, for moderating this, and I'm looking forward to getting into the conversation.
Wonderful, wonderful. So again, welcome everybody to the Dignity in Schools Campaign Week of Action 2021 with Racial Justice Now, DMV chapter, and Professor Mark Warren. We're going to get into a presentation from Mark showing a slideshow. If you can share your screen in regards to the book, Willful Defiance. Are you able to share your screen there, Mark? Is something I need to do? You got it? Okay.
I think I'm okay. If you're seeing it, I think I'm good.
Yep,
Excellent.
It looks good.
Okay. Hold on, just have to get the slideshow going. See. Okay. Well, great. Thank you so much. I'm going to try to give you all the sense of maybe a little bit about for myself, how I ended up in my journey to this book and this project, as well as a little bit of an overview of the book. I will say that it's coming out this week. We had a little bit of a delay because of the pandemic and the paper shortages and truck driver shortages. So I will drop a link into the chat box where you can go and pre-order the book if you want, or it will take you somewhere to purchase an ebook if you would like to do that as well. But this is one of the very first events we're doing about the book, so I'm delighted to be here and doing it with friends in the movement. So let's see. This is not letting me move. Hold on, maybe it's down here. Okay. Actually, the book does start with Zakiya's story, and I'm not going to recount that here because she has done that and Hashim has done that, but we were just talking about it, but I mentioned why I felt it was important to start the book with the experiences of an African-American parent whose son was suspended and expelled as early as pre-K. To really set the context for the book. But I also do it because I think that it raises some of the key themes of the book. Hashim and Zakiya mentioned the amazing accomplishments of Racial Justice Now in Dayton. And it does raise the question, how did small under-resourced community organizing groups in the end change public discourse away from zero tolerance, change policy and practice away from exclusionary discipline, really in districts and states across the country, and begin to bring down school suspension and expulsion rates, as well as some now more recent victories in terms of defunding or removing police from schools. And I think there's a lot in the book, but I would say there's two things that the work and experience of Racial Justice Now shows that I found all around the country. First, the vital importance of people who are most impacted by injustice, by racism being at the center of the movement, whether that's African-American parents, Latinx parents, Black and Brown students, and Native students and their families, their voice, their leadership being at the center of the movement, deep organizing locally, and as well, the connections of these groups across the country to form a national movement, but one that's focused at supporting and spreading and what I've called from G2 Brown, really nationalizing local struggles. So this is not a national movement that's focused mainly on Washington-based professional advocates. It is instead a movement that's centered in people who are most impacted, with organizing groups really controlling the direction of the movement in alliance with many professional advocates, lawyers, scholars like myself. But we're not the ones who are driving the movement. So that's, I think, some of the key themes of the book. that I'm trying to get across. And just to say a little bit about how I got here. So, and I can talk more about this later, but I mentioned earlier that I've been studying and working with organizing groups around educational justice issues for many years. And about 10 years ago, I came out with a book called A Match on Dry Grass with Karen Mapp and some other colleagues when I was at Harvard, actually, at the time. And in that book, we talked about organizing groups as local phenomena. So we almost drew a box around them. They were entirely local. There was almost no discussion of the national situation. And also, interestingly enough, although we mentioned the school to prison pipeline, it wasn't a central feature of the book. But at the same time that the book came out, things were changing. And the Dignity in Schools campaign had just formed nationally. The Alliance for Educational Justice had just formed as a coalition of 28 youth organizing groups. The Journey for Justice Alliance, that some people might be familiar with, to stop school closings in Black and brown communities, was just forming. All of this was happening. And what it represented was that local organizing groups were finding ways to band together. And things were changing in the education reform movement, such that if you didn't have a national movement behind you, it was going to be very hard to win locally. So how do you win locally? By having both deep organizing with people most impacted and being able to learn from, connect with, get resources from a national movement. So that was, and secondly, the whole question of the school to prison pipeline was coming to the fore. And it was really being raised by Black and brown parents and students. And I was listening to those people as I was out in the community and realizing that this really was perhaps the central issue facing the educational justice for our children today. Now, at the same time, I am myself a parent, and I'm married to a Black woman, and we have raised two beautiful Black biracial daughters. And around this time, our own older daughter was entering middle school in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And what had been a very liberal educational, well-funded educational community and school, all of a sudden started to turn towards zero tolerance, not towards the white students in the school, but towards the Black students in the school. And my daughter's Black friends were starting to get suspended and expelled. And I was seeing the school to prison pipeline right in front of me in my own extended, even though I am white, in my own extended family and friendship network. And actually, my wife and I started to not just complain, but to agitate and advocate around issues of racism at the school. And the school department investigated us and harassed us. And so I began to share a little bit of the experiences of what I was starting to hear out there. And obviously, I have other privileges, and our family had some other resources that maybe other people don't have. So I appreciate that too, the relative privilege. But at the same time, it became a personal issue. The school to prison pipeline became a personal issue to me as well. So there are multiple routes to this project. I reached out to the Dignity in Schools campaign and the Alliance for Educational Justice. The Dignity in Schools campaign actually formed a committee and met with me for an entire year to basically check me out and to make sure that as a white male professor, that I could be trusted in listening to and lifting up the stories of people who were involved with their organization. And we talked about a lot of things about how this project was going to happen, and we became partners in this project. We also produced a toolkit on organizing to combat the school to prison pipeline. So it wasn't just an academic research project. It was also about, can I raise money to help produce something of direct value to organizing groups and partner with DSC, who knows much more about practical tools than I do, to create something that's useful. And that is up on the Dignity in Schools campaign website. So there's a lot going on in this project. And then we also produced the Lift Us Up, Don't Push Us Out book as part of it too. So I just wanted to share a little of that. The book does have a chapter on the school to prison pipeline, and I'm not going to go into a lot of that today, except that I think one of the things that I've learned from people in the movement and also from the data about this that I don't think gets always a lot of play is that the school to prison pipeline is part of an intergenerational transmission of criminalization and powerlessness. Just to share with one statistic that I don't think is widely known, there was a study done in the mid-2000s of Black children who were born in 1990. 14 years later, a quarter of these Black children had a parent in prison at one time or another. A quarter. That's a staggering statistic. You may know that, or you may experience that in your own communities, but that is just not very well known. And so I think what's happening in terms of suspending and expelling and policing Black and brown children in school is an intergenerational phenomenon of the discipline and controlling and policing of those parents and other adults in the community as well. And you may know that if you are a Black man that does not graduate from high school, your chances of ending up in prison at one point in your life is 2/3. So in other words, 2/3 of all Black men without a high school degree will end up in prison at some point in their lives in this country. 1/3 are in prison at any one time. So this is a very profound issue of white supremacy and of racism. And I spend some time in the book talking about that because I think it's important to understand this is not a few misguided policies that we can trust educators or academic policymakers to change. It really needs a grassroots movement, just like the civil rights movement didn't occur because somebody in government or somebody in the academy said we need to change these things. It came because of a movement that was built from the ground up and then got allies in other positions too to join with that movement and create change. So just to give you a little bit of a sweep of the book, it starts off in Holmes County, Mississippi, in the first full chapter of the book. And this is in the late 1990s, Black African-American organizers in Holmes County, Helen Johnson and Ellen Reddy and others started meeting children who were out in the street during the school time and asking them what's going on. And it turns out that they were being suspended or just told to leave school for very minor things. They ended up often in juvenile courts. There was a very famous case in another part of Mississippi where there were Black students throwing popcorn on a bus, and popcorn hit the head of a white bus driver, and she drove the bus straight to the police station, and 7 Black boys were arrested for criminal assault and ended up being having to leave school because, for a long story, they eventually didn't get convicted, but they ended up out of school as a result of all of this. So, but I think what's important is that these were the kinds of places where the school to prison pipeline was first talked about. It wasn't in an academic community. It wasn't in a traditional mainstream civil rights community either. It was the voices of Black parents and organizers and students in places like Holmes County, the heart of white racism in the South and in this country, who first started talking about it and actually launched a campaign called the Prevention of Schoolhouse to Jailhouse in the late 90s. And then the chapter also talks about how folks organized to change juvenile law, justice system there, close some of the horrible so-called training schools, which were really, prisons in which young people were terribly abused. And so we start there. And the idea, I think, there is that, and here's a quote called, "There is no national without the local," and it's Joyce Parker here, you see on the right, who's from Mississippi, who's a favorite phrase of hers, and I think a guiding spirit in this book and in the movement. The idea is that these local voices, these local organizings were then lifted up at the national level, eventually by groups like the Dignity in Schools campaign, in the earlier period by an organization called the Advancement Project. And it helped connect local groups together so that they could learn from each other, and the victories and the analysis that was developing locally could be lifted up nationally and then brought back down to inspire and support struggles other ways. And that's the kind of theme of the book. So we travel from Los Angeles, organization called Cadre. You see at the top, that was a group of Black and brown parents in South LA. They were some of the first also to name the school to prison pipeline. They were the first to win changes district-wide in Los Angeles to strike a blow against zero tolerance and start to fund more positive, school-wide positive behavioral supports. And it was really, their victory was really a point that really spurred on the formation of the Dignity in Schools campaign. And then we also go to Denver. Oops, I'm sorry, I hit that too soon. We would go to Denver, the group called Padres y Jóvenes Unidos, which was Latinx parents and students, but mainly students who led the struggle there. And they were the first to get an entire district to reject zero tolerance, to end zero tolerance discipline policies and start to fund and support restorative justice alternatives. We also go to Chicago, which is on the bottom right, where a group of young people in a coalition called Voices of Youth in Chicago Education, organized together and actually led a campaign statewide to change Illinois law called SB 100, Senate Bill 100, the most progressive state law at the time to end zero tolerance. And the book sort of shows how they got the idea of even attempting state policy from organizers in California. And they got resources from the Advancement Project from lawyers who actually helped them write the bill. But they combined that with deep organizing and the leadership and voice of young people who had experienced the school to prison pipeline themselves. And I think that combination has really been what's been powerful in the movement. Forming a national movement like that didn't come easy. It wasn't normal. It was countercultural. It took a struggle. It was a power struggle, really. And we had, and this occurred, and I tell the story that the formation of the Dignity in Schools campaign, which really had started as a group of professional lawyers and advocates, and was transformed when base building groups like Cadre and eventually Racial Justice Now became won the fight to take over the majority of seats on the steering committee, and then proceeded to implement a number of policies that were not typical in Washington-based movement organizations. That a proportion of the funds that DSC raised was always to go to local groups to support them. That parents and youth leaders were always to be brought to Washington to speak for themselves as part of meetings in Congress or in administration. That the organization would be focused on creating resources to support local groups, like a model code of conduct or the school kit we talked about. And that even though it would work around federal strategies and federal policies, its main purpose was really to lift up and share local victories and support organizing that happened locally. And I won't read the quote, but Maisie Chin, who's in the bottom right there, was one of the guiding spirits of the formation of DSC. And she talks about this is really the enduring legacy of DSC. And it's not over. It's a constant struggle because the forces in our dominant, racist world continue to try to give more resources to professional advocates, give them more entree. They're in a position of getting media attention or having the more professionalized communication groups. So how do you continue to try to renovate and reproduce a movement that's grounded in the local area? It's not over. It's a constant process. Okay. Then there's a lot in the book. This is a big movement. It's a very diverse movement. I tried to capture as best I could. So we take a look at how this diverse intergenerational and intersectional movement was formed, the assertion of the voice of Black girls and girls of color and gender nonconforming students about their experiences, their particular experiences, not to take away from or in competition with the experiences of Black boys, who we do know still are, by sheer numbers, the group that is the most in crisis, and even in the school to prison pipeline and educational failure. But nevertheless, the particular experiences that Black girls or gender nonconforming students are having, and how do you create a movement that's able to address all of these issues together? And we talk about the rise of the police-free schools movement, which really took off in the last couple of years. But what people don't always understand is that organizing groups in this movement have been working to end the police presence at schools for over 10 years. And the Black Organizing Project in Oakland was one of the pioneer groups calling 10 years ago for police-free schools. And they were the ones who won a complete end to the contact with police. Yeah.
Yeah, not to interject, just really quickly, Black Organizing Project was the first to call for police-free schools because they were also one of the first districts where an actual SRO actually did kill a student in Oakland in the school. And I don't remember that making much of a national splash at that time, but it has happened in this country.
Yeah. So, and it was in places
like a black male student, by the way.
Black male student, yes. I think at a school dance, as a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure. In any case, it was these kinds of places that really, where the movement emerged, the mass protests emerged, but the organizing groups had been laying the basis for this work for many years. They had been building relationships with school board officials. They had proposed policies already submitted over many years. And so they were kind of ready to go when the movement created a wave that all of a sudden turned public consciousness on the question of police abuse in communities and in schools. So I don't want to, I'm not going to detail all this, but I think it's important that the book does detail the incredible impact that this grassroots movement has had. I mean, when this movement started, zero tolerance was the law of the land. All of the major teachers' unions, all of the major educational associations, as well as school districts and state policy all across the country called for zero tolerance, which meant, suspending and expelling students for things like willful defiance, for minor behavioral issues that were subjectively assessed by teachers. And that was the law of the land. And when folks first started talking about the school to prison pipeline, they were told, you're crazy, there's no such thing. The US government actually issued an official statement saying there is no school to prison pipeline in this country in 2008, when organizers of color and students and parents of color brought the issue up to the UN. So in any case, really defeating zero tolerance, except on the far right where there are still its advocates, and then creating a rolling series of victories at local and state level, and the beginnings of reductions in exclusionary discipline, especially in places where organizing and advocacy have been strong. I talk about Los Angeles here because they had dramatic decreases in suspensions and expulsions from something like 75,000 days lost in 2008 to 5,600 days lost 10 years later. Now, at the same time, there are enduring challenges, including racial disparities. So even though the numbers are down, the disparity, the Black students are still discriminated against and more likely to be suspended and expelled as they were before, in comparison to white students. Okay, policies have changed. Have we really been able to create authentic alternatives that really transform schools towards safety, support, and liberatory educational systems for our young people? In some places, yes, but just the reduction of suspensions doesn't necessarily transform schools in that way. And then third, of course, the new issues around the movement to defund and remove police from schools, newer or brought to the forefront today, but the persistence of police and policing practices and even new forms of surveillance under the pandemic. So the enduring challenges that the movement is trying to address. And just closing again with the idea here of what I call nationalizing local struggles, a theme being, and I got that from G2 Brown in the upper left corner, who was one of the founders of the Journey for Justice Alliance and led a hunger strike against the closing of Dyett High School in the heart of the African-American community on the south side of Chicago. And the point there is that we really need to find it. Local organizing is not going to end up being strong enough today. We have very well-resourced and well-financed organizations nationally. The school to prison pipeline is a national phenomenon. It's not just in Montgomery County. It's not just in Dayton, Ohio. It emerged as a national phenomenon. So to defeat it, it has to be fought out locally, right, where people do send their children to school and live in their communities and districts have a lot of control. It has to be fought out locally, but those victories need to be nationalized, lifted up, to share those lessons with other people, inspire people to act otherwise, act in their own communities, and then create change both at local, state, and national levels. So I like to end with that. We are gathered in what we call the People's Think Tank. Zakiya is one of our steering committee members. And our mission really is to, and in some sense, nationalize the lessons of the organizing that you all are doing, and which is not always very well appreciated. And we do believe that if we're ever going to move in this country towards true democracy, and really the liberation of communities that have been oppressed since colonization, since slavery here, that we have to lift up those voices and those struggles that are happening in our communities by our parents and youth leaders, and see them as at the forefront of the transformation of our society. So thank you very much for listening to me, and I look forward to Zakiya's comments and our conversation.
Excellent, Mark.
Walk down memory lane.
Excellent. That was plenty to take in and digest there. Visually rich, a lot of history as well. Zakiya, you alluded to some of your history and background. Tell us, Mark shared about the movement and all that he studied and observed, and even Dignity in School studied him and observed him for a period of time. Can you tell us what did Mark's contribution on the academic side, coming in and contributing the way he did, how did that assist the movement? How was that valuable, or what was the meaning of that to a parent in a local community and to the movement in general?
That's an excellent question, Hashem. And again, thanks, Mark. I really enjoyed that presentation, and I really enjoyed seeing some of the pictures and, people that I consider extended family all across this country, especially Mama Joyce and others. I was on that planning committee with DSC where we talked to Mark for an entire year to fill him out. I was like, who is this white guy from the university? Is he like wanting to be a colonizer too? He wants to study us and, all that stuff. But it has actually blossomed, I think, for me, I can say personally, into a very meaningful friendship, but also a partnership. Mark has been very much an additional support system, if you will, to support this national movement to end criminalization of Black students and brown students across this country. In that basis of relationship that we took the time to build with him is continuing to manifest. This is, I believe, the second book that Mark has written in relationship or in partnership with community grassroots organizations from the East Coast to the West Coast to the Mississippi Delta, as you can see. He has interviewed and traveled far and wide to ensure that he's lifting up the most, people say the most marginalized, I say the most colonized voices in America still here in 2021. So that kind of partnership has meant a lot. And it has also put me and other grassroots organizers on stages that you would never see us at. I've attended the huge AERA conference, which is a huge conference that happens annually. It's mainly designed and for academics, particularly professors in the education colleges across the country. And I've, sat on panels with the best. And brightest minds when it comes to education and how we do education, or how we should be doing education here in the United States. Dr. Joyce King, Linda Darling Hammond out in California, who is now the education boss of the California education system. She was also considered when Biden won to be the education secretary, but she wanted to remain in California. So I think for me, being able to merge the academy with the community grassroots is something that we need to do, not only in education, but in every field across this country. There has to be a merging of the two. I remember Assata Shakur famously saying, we have to have theory, that's fine, but we also have to have praxis. And she doesn't want the theory if we're not going to do the praxis. And I think many of us forget that. And so I can't thank Mark enough. I'm sure he can tell his own story about some challenges that he's even faced with his own colleagues in the academy, being so much of a partner to grassroots communities where he's had to push for us to be at the table in certain spaces and things like that. So I think that even though it's unfortunate, I'll say this and wrap up the answer to the question, being in partnership with Mark, and certainly my story leading off both of these books, also provides a sense of legitimacy for some people. It's not enough for some people to just be a grassroots organizer and a freedom fighter. Some people will not necessarily listen to you unless you are joined at the hip with somebody that has a PhD, and that's unfortunate. But but that partnership again with Mark has opened the ears, or at least people will pay attention if I am accompanying him into a room that you would normally not see a grassroots organizer. So it's been a good marriage, so to speak, in terms of both of those communities coming together. And I think that we are doing the work necessary to transform not just the minds of our policymakers, but even some of our academics as well.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you for that insight. Now back to the bookmark. The name, Willful Defiance. How did the book get named that?
Actually, it was one of my students, Drew King, who suggested the name. And so first of all, if you don't know, Willful Defiance is a category in which, I mentioned this a little earlier, but it's a category in which students can be suspended. So you can be suspended for being willfully defiant. And it's called different things in different places. Some places they call it willful disobedience. Some places they call it disrupting school. It's a kind of broad catch-all like category. So, if you come into school and you won't, in the classroom, you won't take your hat off, well, you're willfully defiant, you can be suspended. One of the stories at the beginning of the book is about a African-American young woman, girl, a high school girl at the time, who challenged a teacher because her history textbook came from Texas. And she's saying, well, why can we trust this is really the history that we should be learning? Well, she was kicked out of the classroom for being willfully defiant. It's a subjective term, and being subjective, meaning it's not like, oh, you were caught smoking. Okay, I guess that's a little bit more objective. Willful defiance is a completely subjective. If we're out in an affluent suburb and a boy is quote unquote acting up, well, he's precocious. But if you're in an urban community and it's a Black boy acting up, well, he's being willfully defiant. He needs to be disciplined, controlled, and suspended. So, and hundreds of thousands of students are suspended for that reason that kind of reason across the country. And so it was a way of, in a sense, play of words on that. So, okay, people are being suspended for willfully defiance, but actually this is a movement of people who are being willfully defiant. They're not doing it as individuals, but they are willfully defying a system that has been designed to control and discipline them. And so I think it's a powerful way of turning the tables on the system. And it's a powerful image and I think title. It was suggested by a student of mine, Drew, and I originally was a little unsure because Zakiya was, and I've been talking about, my position as a white male professor. I don't want to, recreate trauma for anybody who has been suspended for willful defiance, right? I have to be sensitive to that. But we took it around, took it to the DSC committee, took it to our friends in Alliance for Educational Justice, and people really thought this is really a powerful title. It does capture something that's important about our movement, and really wanted me to go ahead and use that in that title. So that's kind of how it came about. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you.
Can I add really quickly, Hashem? I know you're get ready to get to the next question, but I believe that was also the first law around this national movement to end the school to prison pipeline. It was a California law that Maisie and them, Padre and all of them were able to get overturned. Yeah. And it was the willful defiance law. It was a statewide law in California.
Right. So you cannot suspend a child. I'm not going to get the age is correct. It doesn't cover, I think it temporarily covers every grade. Yes, you cannot send a child in California for willful defiance. That was a victory of the movement. Started in LA, they got it passed first in LA, and then I got it across. And that's part of the reason why I gave you the suspension numbers. That's a big reason why those suspension numbers have gone way down, because you can't suspend a student for willful defiance.
For all that, yeah. And I pointed out in the comments or in the chat while you were talking, Mark, willful defiance in Ohio was disruptive behavior. And so we were able to get that done locally in Dayton, where it was no longer an offense that children could be suspended for out of school. Like the district had to come up with other ways to deal with those sort of catch-all sort of subjective discipline. And we eventually was able to work and get that done pre-K through third grade for all students across the state in Ohio. And
I'll just add, I know we're going on this, but in some states, it's actually a criminal offense disrupting school. So there was I think some
Maryland is one of them.
Maryland is okay. Many states, in the very famous case of that Nia Kenny, the girl who filmed, if you might remember, there was a Black girl, high school student, who refused to turn off her phone or hand her phone in or something. And the teacher called in the security officer who body slammed her to the ground, and Nia Kenny filmed that. And it was one of the first big kind of went viral cases of police abuse in schools. Well, Nia and the girl who was body slammed, they were both charged with criminal disruption of school, not just suspended for it. And there had to be a national campaign to help get those charges dropped. So this is the extent to which the school to prison pipeline has been embodied deeply into not just the district codes of conduct, but actually state law.
Well, I think this is really a great segue into this next question. You're describing the school to prison pipeline from its beginning, the zero tolerance issues, the code of conduct that Racial Justice Now was able to get changed, and DSC was able to provide training to members to help them advocate at the school board level to get things changed. So we're talking about the school to prison pipeline. How does it go further? How does it, what are the next steps in the school to prison pipeline? We talked about these students being suspended and put out. What are the next steps? And then what are the, the various parts of the school to prison pipeline for Zakiya? And then the follow-up question being, what has been accomplished by parents and other advocates to dismantle the school to prison pipeline? So again, two-part question. What is the school to prison pipeline as a whole? We talked about certain steps that lead to it, getting to prison. We haven't got to prison yet, but we've gotten to where they're suspended and expelled, and why, the reasoning why, the laws or rules that will make up to bring that about. But again, the school to prison pipeline, the rest of the parts that make it up, and then what has been accomplished in dismantling the school to prison pipeline.
Yeah, I can hop in on that first. So I'll keep it locally. What's going on here in Maryland and Montgomery County as well. So there's a couple of parts of it. Student codes of conduct are extremely punitive. The other piece is that the student code of conduct is not implemented with fidelity, is actually implemented with a racial bias. I think Mark alluded to that a little bit, where, you'll see maybe a white or sometimes even an Asian student, and the behavior is not even described or articulated or viewed from the educator's perspective as the same if you would see a Black student or a Latino student doing the same thing. So all of it is encoded with that kind of racial bias, in particular anti-Blackness. But it definitely starts with the student code of conduct, when in many school districts, a lot of where we started, and as you know, Hashem, we started with the student code of conduct in Dayton, and we had to even get the actual language of zero tolerance taken out. And what we find in a lot of places, and this reminds me of our organizing in Dayton, I remember the school district there said, well, we have Ohio law says we have to be zero tolerance. And that was our first sort of introduction in saying, oh, okay, these policies are married to state law. And so we had to start having conversations with our state lawmakers. The same is true here in Montgomery County and here in Maryland. As you know, we're working locally. Racial Justice Now was the first organization last summer after the uprisings across the country around the response to the execution and state-sanctioned murder of George Floyd. Many young people and parents together started organizing. First, it was in Minneapolis, where the Minneapolis School Board voted to end its SRO contract with the Minneapolis Police Department. That was extremely transformative. And so what that opened the door to was that this can be done and that this is the time to get it done. So we made a public proclamation and reached out to the first council person that we reached out to personally was Will Jawando, who is an at-large county council person here in Montgomery County. And the county here, and it's a little different in Dayton, the budget in Dayton for the schools in the city are separate. Here, the county actually funds or appropriates the budget and approves the budget for the schools. So we had to do it a little bit different. The county council does have some significant say in terms of what happens with the school district here, although we do have an elected school board. So we got Will Jawando to commit publicly that he would commit to trying to work with the school board to have a police-free schools at the open of the school session this year. And that took a lot of work. Eventually, what happened here in Montgomery County is a groundswell of other community organizations, including many students. I have to shout out the students here. They were MCPS students, so proud of them. They have their own groups. There was the Asian American student organization. There was the Latino student organizations, and of course the African American student organizations. And then there were a couple of organizations where they were all together and they did their own organizing. They did their own meetings with the county council and the county executive and even state lawmakers. We were able to get 2 state lawmakers, both from Montgomery County, to introduce the Counselors Not Cops bill in the Maryland General Assembly. And then the Police Free Schools bill was introduced by Gabe Alcevero. The Counselor Not Cops bill was introduced by Janelle Wilkins. Again, both of them are delegates from Montgomery County. And so while neither one of those actually passed, a few of them did receive hearings. As you can imagine, there was a lot of pushback and there certainly wasn't a lot of consensus on that. In terms of your question about where we are now, we are currently a part of about 90 organizations across the state that's still pushing for police reform. There was a lot of police reform bills passed in this last General Assembly in Maryland, particularly Anton's Law and repealing the Law Enforcement Bill of Rights, which were huge. And we absolutely 100% unequivocally supported both of those. But the school bills were the 2 bills that did not make it. And so now these 90 plus organizations are turning our attention to cleaning up the bills that have been passed. That's number one. But then also pushing forward on decriminalizing disruption of schools. So that is a law as well here in Maryland. Mark pointed out the law that they used to charge those 2 students in South Carolina. You'd be surprised, a lot of states have laws like that on the books. And so we do have a state senator and a delegate who is willing to introduce that bill. We have Atterbury out of Howard County, who will sponsor the House version of that bill here in Maryland, and Senator Washington in Baltimore City. So Baltimore City and Baltimore County are different here. I have a whole lot of thoughts about that. But anyway, so we do have that's moving forward, and then we're still working out are trying to see if we can get some sponsors for the Police Free Schools bill and Counselors Not Cops bill. So we're still working both at the local and at the state level around this decriminalization piece for students, but it's certainly a hard road to go, as my great grandmother would say. I will want to point out, and I'll wrap this up, that Hashem, you know, we worked mainly with a Republican legislature in Ohio and a Republican governor. It took us a very long time to get our pre-K through third grade bill done in Ohio as well, but we knew we were dealing with certain politicians there. We knew that it would be hard because the Republican Party controlled politics there. They controlled every state office, both of the state legislatures and the governorship. I will say that experience taught me a lot. I learned a lot about the bill making process and attending the interested party meetings and all of that. And I learned a lot about politics and just in general. And there was, as you know, Hashem, Peggy Lehner, who is now running for mayor of Kettering, Ohio. She's no longer in the Ohio Senate. She was the glue that kept us going each year. She promised us, this Black community group of Black parents in Dayton, that she cared about this issue genuinely and that she was working hard to get this bill passed. And we knew so much about that because there was one of her colleagues, a Republican from another part of the state of Ohio, who just obstructed her at every you know, at every end when she would try to get this bill out of committee. Several years we weren't able to get it out of committee because that one sort of Tea Party type of Republican, and he finally left the legislature to run for county commission. And so it was that next year when that person wasn't there that the bill finally passed out of committee, and of course on to the rest of the legislative process. John Kasich, people may know him from this last election. He was on the news a lot. Is considered a moderate Republican. He signed the bill into law. He actually did a lot around decriminalizing things in Ohio in terms of Black fathers who, you know, have lots of issues around child support, who would have those collateral consequences of not being able to get a barber's license or not being able to do certain things. Kasich was very progressive, if you will, on issues of criminal justice. However, I have found that working in Maryland with a supermajority of Democrats, we do have a Republican governor, that the process is a lot harder than I assumed that it would be. I assumed, I guess, that being in a place like this, that these kinds of issues, it wouldn't be as hard working with Democrats to get this kind of progressive legislation done, but it's certainly been an interesting 2 years working with the General Assembly here in Maryland and seeing just how hard it is around criminal justice issues to get things done.
Thank you for elaborating on that, Zakiya. Anybody in the back, anybody attending, feel free to put a question in the chat if you have any questions. We're getting at, it's 2:05, we're going to end at 2:30. And so if you have any questions, we would love to make sure that they get answered. We're here again, Dignity in Schools campaign, the Week of Action 2021 with Racial Justice Now, DMV chapter. The book event going on with Professor Mark Warren from the University of Boston at Amherst. We got Zakiya Sankara-Jabar, co-director and founder of, executive director and co-founder of Racial Justice Now from Dayton, Ohio originally, now in the Montgomery County, Maryland area, continuing in the organizing, advocacy, policy change work, and leadership development. So this question, we're going to throw it back to you, Mark. We talked about the national movement and the work that you've done in being inspected by Dignity in Schools campaign, bringing some things to the table for the movement. Zakiya discussed how she and others benefited from your work. What is the role of the national movement in supporting local organizing? We saw your role and some others' roles, but explain to us and give us a better understanding on the roles of the national movement in supporting local organizing.
Sure. Thank you. Be happy to. So I think that there's a number of contributions or ways that I think a national movement supports local organizing. So one, I think that is not often realized is for it to really create the kind of change that Zakiya has been talking about, that we've seen in places like Mississippi and California. It really takes impatient, but persistent organizing over a fairly long period of time. And, how do people persist in that? Well, I think feeling part of a national movement, connecting with people from outside of your local area is one of those ways to be inspired by others, to be mentored by others, to have that feeling that, what we're doing here in Dayton or in Montgomery County, I know folks who are doing the same kind of thing in Chicago or in New York. And I think that's a very important contribution actually that's made. When people feel isolated in local areas and powerless, it's difficult to really persist over some period of time. Secondly, I think there's the idea of learning from each other, that the national movement creates venues in which people can learn about the strategies that were pursued other places or the policies that were put forward in other places. And these become ideas for them, again, to combine with their own authentic local organizing, but they're not creating everything from scratch here. And then thirdly, connected to that is concrete resources. Like the Dating in Schools campaign put together a model code of conduct, a code for human rights and dignity. And there are concrete resources in there, a model code comparison tool that you can use to assess the code of conduct, which lays out school discipline codes in various districts. You don't have, again, you're not starting from scratch. You can take that kind of resource and you can, implement it and use it in your local area. The toolkits that come out, the policy reports. And then again, I think if it can be done in equitable partnerships, these national movements bring people like myself to places like Dayton, or they bring the Advancement Project, for example, has brought lawyers, community-oriented lawyers to places like Chicago to help them write the policies for SB 100. So there's like skills and expertise that can be brought in from professional advocates and lawyers through a national movement. And again, the question is, are they coming in to tell people what to do, or are they coming in to pursue partnerships where we bring, our expertise and our skills and our knowledge, but we're trying to partner with people who also bring their lived experience, but also their skills and expertise and knowledge to the table. And what can we produce together that moves the movement forward? So I think there's a number of concrete resources, or even communications assistance. And then the last thing is, I think what DSC pioneered was the idea of small grants to local member organizations. So it's hard for a local organization to raise money when it doesn't have a big staff, it doesn't have a development team, it doesn't have a reputation, if you will. And it's another phenomenon of racism in this country and anti-Blackness is that groups that are led by Black and brown parents and students don't necessarily get the trust and respect from major foundations that they should have. So if you have an organization like DSC that has more capacity to raise money, is it just raising it for its own national activity, or does it take the responsibility of then re-granting some of that money down to the local organizations? And a lot of, small amounts of money can often make a big difference to what an organization can do at the ground level, particularly early on, but at any point. Yes. So I think these are a lot of different kinds of ways.
That's great. Yes.
Can I also say, sorry. Ahead, Mark. No, I just wanted to say that I didn't realize, but I think Janice Harper is here with us, and she's actually from Mississippi, from Holmes County, the Nolly Jenkins Family Center. Where the first chapter of the book really starts and some of the stories start. So just want to acknowledge her Thank you for coming. And, I know Hashim, you're our MC, but if she has any thoughts herself, I would be welcome to hear her contributions or her experience in participating in the book project.
Yes, you read my mind. You read my mind there, Mark, and we were operating on the same vibration as you had mentioned in your slideshow. You mentioned in your slideshow that Holmes County was where it all started. And we do have Janice on the line, and I didn't want to put her on the spot, but if she would love to share a few words, that would be great. One of the great things about going back to our last question about the connection between the local and the national is that we have the opportunity to do what we might call cross-pollination. There's so many things going on that happen in Oakland, that happen in Mississippi, and then they make their way over to the next county and the next county and the next state. We've learned from this organizing, advocacy, and policy work that it's almost like it's out of a box. It's like the same value meal, the same biscuit, the same fries, the same shake that you'll find that's being done in California or in this state or the other state that's being duplicated. And so it's very significant to be able to communicate with people across the country, moving at the speed of fiber optics today and giving us a heads up and saying, oh, we're seeing the exact same thing that's going on in Dayton, is going on in Camden, New Jersey, and they're seeing the same thing in Chicago, Illinois. So even on the litigation levels and on the different levels of society and the government, whether the state or the county or the local government, all of it plays a factor. So it looked like Janice has some other things going on, but we do have a question in the chat, and I'm glad somebody asked the question. I was glad to see this come up from Mr. Dagonia. Mr. Thomas Dagonia, he says, what are some of the best practices you have seen in prosecutors' offices around the country? They play a political role. Excuse me, I'm having a difficult time. They play a critical role in these decisions. What are some of the best practices you have seen in prosecutors' offices around the country? They play a critical role in these decisions. And we'll let you take that, Zakiya.
That's actually a really good question. I'm having a hard time trying to recount maybe some actual best practices as it relates to this, other than I know that there are movements across the country and new PACs that are trying to run or looking to run progressive prosecutors. So progressive prosecutors who won't prosecute kids for disrupting school and send them to jail or juvenile detention and things like that. I know that Chicago has been said to, I believe her name is Kim Gardner, the new prosecutor there, is said to be progressive. I always judge that based on grassroots folks, like, what are the people saying, right? Like sometimes we give people these titles and then you talk to the people in the community and it's a night and day kind of story. I guess to just answer that question quickly, I am not sure. Mark, you may know of some, but I am not sure as it relates specifically to the school to prison pipeline if there are prosecutors who are implementing a set of best practices. I do know that there's organizations and organizers who have been calling for significant changes in the prosecutor's office in terms of prosecuting kids for like the laws that we're talking about, disrupting schools and things like that, things that are very subjective, things that are not required by law, minimums and things like that. I think outside of weapons and maybe drugs, there's a lot of wiggle room when it comes to young people. And so, Mark, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that around prosecutors.
I did want to share something, though, Zakiya. This is Maryland's or local subject matter, and it's a great question again, Mr. Dagonia. I want to highlight that I was very surprised. We have, again, our family from Mississippi on the line. I was very surprised to find out some statistics about Maryland. I was very surprised to find out that Maryland locks up more Black men than any other of the 50 states. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know if that's.
Yeah, that was the ACLU report, I think.
Right. And so I want to look at this question a little differently. You say, what are some of the best practices you've seen in the prosecutor's office around the country? I want to look at the question and say, what are some of the best practices that Maryland is locking up Black men? Because they really are skillfully doing this. Now, how does Maryland lead the nation above Mississippi, above Alabama, above Arkansas? You know, that's, so I want to partly help you look at the question again from your own perspective to answer that question, to look into those statistics, because I was fascinated, that this little small state, I don't know if it's the measurement is per capita. So how do they lock up? Now, we found the statistics of Montgomery County, and that this progressive county, they say, right, that it's so progressive and forward thinking, but the statistics say the same thing that other counties say, or school districts say, that Latinos and Blacks, particularly males, are disproportionately suspended in school and out of school suspensions. And so that is a peg in the process of the school to prison pipeline. So step by step, that's just one peg. But how does Maryland do it so well comparison to others? So beyond Democratic, beyond Republic, the great philosopher Jay-Z says, men lie, women lie, but numbers don't lie. So how can it lead? So and then we can talk about the progressive things and those types of nature, but we're dealing with the raw, uncut truth of the school to prison pipeline being a very real and considerable fact in Montgomery County, in the state of Maryland. Now that correct me if I'm wrong, but the governor said he wants to refund and double down
yesterday
on these things. So this is a very significant, I think, overlooked. I really feel I say, wow, Maryland, you're doing great. You have some of the best practices across the country. You see my picture, locking up children that look like me, and my son looks like me. And my other son looks like me, and my daughters look like me. So you had something to say. It looks like Mr. Ghost, please.
No. Yeah. Well, Mr. Jabar, to directly to that point, you're absolutely right. In Montgomery County, over the last 6 years, 88% of the children in the juvenile justice system are children of color. 99% over that same 6 years who were charged as adults out of the juvenile system are children of color. So that's why I'm asking, I agree with you. That's a critical link in the school to prison pipeline. Are those, what do we charge? How do we charge it? Should we be charging it? And so I was hoping, I wasn't softballing. I was trying to get hey, what are other places doing that are more progressive and are actually addressing issues, not just pushing people through that pipeline, which it seems to me, based on the numbers, that's what we're doing here in progressive Montgomery County. We're not looking for solutions. So
yeah, I can commit to you that we will definitely do our due diligence to ask around. We're connected to a lot of national organizations who do this kind of work, and there's some specific like national groups that are based in DC but do national work. We can definitely ask around. And I have some other colleagues that I'm thinking about that we can, because that's an excellent question. What are the best practices? What prosecutors or best practices do you all see from other jurisdictions across the country when it comes to prosecutors' involvement in their role in perpetuating the school to prison pipeline? So we're going to actually copy this question and send it around to our email list and see what kind of hits we get back. I'm sure some of my colleagues would have a much better answer to provide you. And I think we may have your email since you registered for this, and we can try to follow up with you with that. But thank you for joining today.
Thank you. It's been a great discussion. Thank you.
Can I just add a couple things to this? And I'm not an expert on what the best practices are by prosecutors. I mean, I know of things here or there, but I will say a couple of other things. First of all, changing so policing practices and the presence of police in schools is a funnel into juvenile arrest. So schools that have police stationed in there have a much higher rates of referrals of students to law enforcement. So students aren't being referred in the first place, and then they're not in the system. So I think there are structural issues. So if we are able to stop the pipeline earlier before folks even get in front of prosecutors, then that, now school is not the only way. People can come in through contact in the community, but actually schools is a major way. And some studies have shown, I think it was North Carolina, 40% of people who are in the juvenile justice system, 40% of them report their first contact with police having occurred in a school. So it's a major way that the children are being funneled into the system. And then the second thing that I learned in Mississippi, actually, was the work that some of the organizations in Mississippi do to build relationships with, well, whether they're it varies whether these are prosecutors or court referees or judges that are in the system. So it's not just the prosecutors, there's a set of individuals who have discretion there too. And so, I think some of our bigger cities or bigger areas, there's a very, the prosecutors don't come from the communities in which young people are coming from, don't really understand the context, don't know young people as real people and their families. And, I remember our children, I was referring to them earlier, their experiences in Cambridge, we ended up in high school in Brookline, which was a more affluent, kind of a suburb, but closer to the city. Anyway, the principal said that his philosophy was children make mistakes. That's our bottom line philosophy. So we're not here to punish students when they make mistakes. We're here to help them grow from those mistakes. And that's the attitude you see in other places where principals and policing and are more part of the community and responsive to the community and understand families and have their own children in the schools. It's just a different. And by the way, this isn't all mistakes by children either. There are children going into the juvenile system that have made no mistakes. But let's just say that it's a different starting point to how you're now encountering the young people who are in front of you. And so I know in places like Mississippi and maybe others, organizers do the work of building these kinds of relationships, trying to bring people out into the community so that when they're making and talking about alternatives to incarceration, we have the whole JDAI alternative system to juvenile justice. And I know that there are pilot programs in Mississippi around that and other parts of the country too, that are looking at alternatives to incarceration or placement into detention facilities. Just a few thoughts.
Thank you for sharing that, Mark.
Yeah.
So as we begin to wind down, as they say, land the plane, Racial Justice Now does the organizing, advocacy, policy change work, leadership development, working particularly with parents in the community. Zakiya, can you share with us from the perspective of the parent in the community, what kind of advice would you give parents about advocating for their children in school? And maybe you can share the different reasons why parents are advocating at school.
Absolutely. I think it's critical, particularly for Black parents, to be joined at the hip of the teachers, the principals, the entire school staff where their children are attending school. And I think just, firstly, just being present, like communicating with the school here in Montgomery County. It's easy, to kind of get in contact with the school or get in contact with the principal or the teachers or whoever it is. And for the most part, I've had mostly a good experience in the schools that my children, our children have attended here. The other thing that I would say is create a relationship at the very beginning of the school year. One of the most critical things that I found as a parent is that at the very beginning of the school year, show up. Make yourself known to your child's teacher, to your child's school community. Just making yourself known and saying, hey, I'm here as a resource. My children, we care very much about their success, care very much about how well they do in school. And so if you ever need me for anything, don't hesitate to reach out. And that for me has been very transformative in terms of building a good relationship from the beginning with the teacher, where you're establishing some trust between each other. You're establishing the ways in which it's best for you to communicate back and forth. And then finally, when issues do arise, know sort of the chain of command. Usually, and what I found here at NCPS, the assistant principals handle discipline. So you're not going to usually go directly to the principal. And if you do go directly to the principal, I found out that they'll send you back to the assistant principal because they have their roles kind of already set out. And assistant principals in general, has been my experience, deal with discipline here in MCPS. So again, establishing that relationship, ask questions, right? Like I have a lot of tools at my resource. So sometimes, I'll say, have the school considered this form of discipline, or have you guys implemented any kind of restorative practices or restorative justice? Sort of what kind of training did you guys receive at the beginning of the school year? Are you guys doing anything on racial equity? Like sometimes that can overwhelm the assistant principal because they're not used to families being that knowledgeable or knowing about the different things that they need to know about and to question and ask about. So that's just a little bit about the formula that I use, because if I'm preaching to the schools that relationships matter, I also have to practice it. Because I find out when you have an authentic relationship with somebody, you're willing to kind of work together. You're willing to kind of make compromises. You're willing to kind of say, you know what, I know this student, has very active parents. I know that, sometimes all I may have to say, I know this works for my daughter and my son. They'll say, hey, we're going to make a phone call home. They'll straighten up right then and there. You know what I mean? And usually that kind of good relationship where it's not you are first interacting with the teacher because they've called you about what your little child has done, because that can leave a bad taste in your mouth, both for you and the educator, both for you and the assistant principal, right? It can kind of just, if it starts off that way, then it just perpetuates and it rolls into a big ball. And usually the child and the parent are on the losing ends when that good relationship isn't really established at the very beginning. And I'll tell a quick story. I had an excellent experience with my son, and I have not always been able to say that as it relates to school because he's a Black boy, but we had an amazing principal at his middle school. And for the first time in Amir's life in education, he had never been suspended out of school. Because we had a principal that I actually didn't have to educate. He was already on board with restorative practices, right? He already believed in it. He already did not have a deficit lens when it came to my son because he was a Black boy. And this principal happened to be a Black man himself, happened to be a father of 3 Black boys attending Maryland schools. He lived in PG County. And so I can say that a huge weight, honestly, was taken off of my shoulder by having him being the building leader, because as the building leader, he was able to corral his staff, the teachers and others, to say, this is the philosophy that we operate by in this school. This is what's going to happen when this happens with the student. I mean, he constantly surrounded my son and other boys, with supports. The other thing that happened, and I'll be remiss not to mention this, is that he actually saw the brilliance in Amir. The other thing that we hadn't talked about is that a lot of times Black boys who are highly intelligent, who are not being introduced with rigor in school, they act out. They're bored as hell, right? So they're acting out and causing disruptions in the class because, number one, the educator doesn't necessarily see them as highly intelligent. They don't see the leadership skills because they're not trained to see that in a Black boy. And then number two, he's just being a kid. Well, I'm bored. My friends are here. We're going to throw spitballs at each other, right? Of course, now everybody is frustrated. This particular principal knew that. He knew that, sometimes when the behavior is happening, what's happening is that there's a lack of rigor. There is a lack of high expectations. And surrounding him, surrounding Amir with that kind of support in middle school, he ended up in advanced classes for the first time in his life. You know, who the educators saw his brilliance, you know. Now, he doesn't like always being in advanced classes because he's a budding high schooler now. He's in high school, and he's, you know, just like any other kid at that age, especially a young man, sometimes you have to stay on them and keep on them. But thankfully, again, like I said, I've had some of the best experiences, again, with educators who get it, principals who get it, and who are not trained to look at the child through a deficit lens. So I know that was a long answer, but it's what we preach in this movement, like, you know, changing the way the adults in the building think about the children that they're dealing with. And you'll see the discipline disparities plummet when you have the right building leader.
Yeah. Mark, any last words as we wrap up?
No, I just put the link to the book's website in the chat box again. And it's not just about buying the book. There's also resources there. There's more information there as well. So if you'd like to check it out, we did build this website together as partners. But overall, just want to thank you all for welcoming me here. It's really been an honor and a privilege to be an ally or even part of the movement, my own part of the movement that activist scholars like myself need to be in. And for me, I think it's just a very rewarding work. And I'm happy to be in touch with anyone who is interested in furthering this discussion, or doing work that will support and help build the movement. So thank you, Hashim and Zakiya, for inviting me, and thank everyone for coming, and especially also Janice for coming in from Mississippi and representing the national movement with us here today.
Yes, thank you, Janice. Thanks everybody for joining. I know we had a few people drop off, but this was really pleasant, and we recorded this, so we'll also share this out on social media as well.
Yes, thank you for joining us with the Dignity in Schools Campaign Week of Action. This is the first day. It's being launched today, so we're happy to be a part of the launch. The Community Not Cops is the rallying cry for students, parents, and organizers across the national Week of Action against school pushout. So we thank our professor for being with us here, sharing the great document that Racial Justice Now Zakiya Sankara-Jabar is a part of. Willful Defiance, the movement to dismantle the school-to-prison pipeline. It tells the stories of how Black and brown parents and students organized to dismantle the school-to-prison pipeline in their local schools and built a movement that spread across the country. It examines organizing processes in Mississippi, Los Angeles, and Chicago, showing how parents and students of color changed exclusionary discipline policies that suspend and expel students of color at disproportionate rates and policing practices that led students into the juvenile and criminal justice systems. So we're again excited to be a part of that project, and you can pick that book up, Willful Defiance. And we are again Racial Justice Now here in the Montgomery County, Maryland area. The work we do, we are committed to dismantling structural and institutional anti-Black racism in all areas of people activity. Our primary focus is and has been on the institution of education and lifting up the voices of disempowered Black parents and children. We are dedicated to stopping the school-prison pipeline and focus specifically on holding institutions accountable to equitable distributions of resources and services to the Black community. Thank you all for coming. We all appreciate you greatly. You can find out more information at rjndmv.org. Also, Dignity in Schools Campaign.org. So we appreciate your attendance. Feel free to reach out and contact us through our website, rjndmv.org. And we look forward to a further dialogue with you about ending the school to prison pipeline. Thank you.